Paul Masvidal, welcome to 69 Faces of Rock. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right.
Okay. This interview will focus on your involvement with band Death. You did some extensive work, some work that's very memorable. Fans are still, in fact, I saw a guy today showing you his old t-shirts. So there are still fans out there who remember this time and value it greatly. So when did you first get to know Chuck?
I don't know what year it was, but we were part of the underground tape trading scene. You know, I was in high school, you know, and we were pen pals. We wrote each other letters, and then I got his phone number, you know, through a friend and started to call him, and we both guitar players, and, you know, I was into the Death demos, you know, and so we just, and then eventually I was, you know, playing with him, like before even Human, you know, and stuff, so.
What attracted you to his music?
I don't know, it's just visceral and catchy, you know. I liked Chuck's mid-rangey growl. I always felt like he had a good, he took like, you know, this extreme art form, which is death metal, and kind of made it palatable in a way. It was very like user-friendly and almost singable, you know. But also extreme, and then he obviously had his influences in like a lot of old metal, but he had his own little twist with certain scales. He had a little sound going that was his own, and he cultivated that, and I liked that. It felt refreshing, you know.
I believe the first time you filled in Death was in Mexico during Leprosy tour. Can you tell me about it?
So Chuck was, I think this was, I don't know if it was the tail end of Leprosy, but
Pretty much, yeah.
yeah, and he got it. I guess he had split with Rick Ross, and I just happened to be one of those friends that, you know, was on the phone talking to Chuck all the time, and he just gave me a holler and was like, "Man, I'm in a pinch. I've got this gig. Can you help me?" And I was like, "Sure." And so I had to learn like, you know, my 15, 20 songs in like a week and a half or something. But Death's music was, it's pretty simple compared to a Cynic, so I was like, okay, I can do this, you know. So yeah, so that was the first time, and then obviously that led to more.
Yeah, you did reconnect with Chuck musically around Human Time. Were you involved in any of the songwriting for that record?
I mean, Chuck, like I would say, would write like the foundational, you know, embryo of all his music. Like he would create the core kind of foundation. But I think, you know, having been with Chuck all those years, even having done some touring with him for Spiritual Healing, I already had this kind of relationship with him as a guitar player. So he trusted me, you know, there was a bit of a trust thing. So I think he gave me, and then once he realized what a monster of a musician Sean was, he kind of, and he knew he wanted to push things, he gave us a little bit of room to just do your thing. So we got to sprinkle a little bit of our, you know, fairy dust all over Death's music. And I would say the same with Steve DiGiorgio. You know, he was bringing himself to it and really connecting with Reinert and stuff, so as a rhythm section. So there was just an interesting combination of elements that had to do with a long relationship with Chuck on my end. Steve had his own long relationship with Chuck as well, and then Reinert's playing, so he felt like he was in good hands, you know. He was like surrounded by musicians.
Which brings me to my next question. Like, what mental shape was Chuck in around that time? Because there was a really bad breakup of the previous lineup, and all of a sudden...
Yeah. He was, I think once he turned the corner on realizing the record he had, he was in great shape and very confident. But early on, there was a rough period there where he felt a lot of betrayal and rage, and I think a lot of the record was fueled by that. Most of Death's records were fueled by these kind of a response to something that maybe had happened in his life or events. And this was definitely had a lot of that in it. It was just like you know, he was gonna prove something, you know.
And he did.
I guess, yeah. I mean, he made a cool record. Yeah.
Tell me about the recording process for Human.
I remember, we had, compared to Cynic or other bands at the time, Death were more established, and we had, we were used to doing things very quick in the studio, so we would always be super prepared, as a band. So when we went in to record drums, I remember Sean had a whole week to cut drums, and he finished them all, I think, in one day. Mm-hmm. And they were just like, what are we gonna do? We have all this extra time. Like the drums were finished, 5-6 days early. So that's when we realized, and we started to, we also worked on the Cosmic Sea instrumental. We were like, oh, let's write it, let's make another. So we wrote that in the studio, we kind of made it all happen on the fly. So there was just like, I think it was the spirits were uplifted and we had a good time. Yeah, it was fun to record that stuff.
Was Chuck easy person to work with in the studio?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he was, he knew what he was going for, and he was always very professional about, how he would approach recording and whatnot. But yeah, I think Chuck, I mean, the studio is more of a creative process, right? You're more trying to capture a song, so it's not, it didn't have a lot of the aggravators that, touring or something else would have, but so for the most part it was pretty smooth.
How much freedom were you given during those sessions?
I mean, just like we were doing what we could, we were pretty free. Yeah, I mean, I think there was moments where we maybe pushed things too far and Chuck would rein it back because we were used to being very free with Cynic without any rules, but we were also sensitive to that as fans of Death. We knew the language, so we weren't going to go, we were just trying to keep it within the parameters of knowing what would be best for Death. We were trying to be good players in that way.
When you were recording the album, Human, of course, were you aware you were onto something special there?
No, I don't think you ever think any of this is special. That's a dangerous place.
Yeah.
You just think, you feel good about what you're doing, or you trust in the process and the authenticity of what you're going for. And it's more guided by that. And sometimes that can look like highly neurotic, or it could look like crazy or whatever, but it's more about trying to stay in a creative process. Outcomes are irrelevant, or like whether it's like, that's a good performance. That feels accurate. So you're just constantly trying to capture something. It's more about being in the moment with making art. You're not really thinking beyond that at all. So specialness is not even in the mind. It's more just like, ooh, that felt good. Let's keep that. Now let's go on to the next thing. Like it's more just trying to capture sounds. And
what was Steve DeGiorgio to work with at that time?
Steve's groovy, man. Yeah, he's a brother.
Were you surprised how successful Human had become, and how quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know, like, did it really break a lot when it came out? I guess it was critically acclaimed and stuff, and people liked it out there, but I think it still was kind of a little bit advanced because people were used to Death being more a different thing, and it was all, whoa, where did they go kind of thing. So there was a little bit of that reaction to it, but
I'm sure.
But over time, I mean, people caught on, and I mean, it definitely marks a new era for Death, right? It was like the beginning of things changing for Chuck.
Absolutely. Tell me about the Human tour.
Oh wow, well, that was a ride. That was a hell of a
It was.
Yeah.
I was there.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, we had some great shows, and we had some and not so great shows. It was, touring is like a accelerated life. You go out on the road for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and it feels like you just lived for 2 years. Like so many experiences get concentrated on the road, and Death was nothing short of that. It was very packed with rich experiences.
Absolutely.
I mean, the band imploded essentially, at one point, and it was really Chuck kind of just being really frustrated with everything and not being able to go on.
And how different was Chuck on the road as opposed to in the studio?
I mean, again, sometimes it's great, and sometimes it just depends. Like anybody, it's the travails of the road, right? You have some good shows, and spirits are up, and so in general, fine. I don't know that he was, built for being a road dog. It's not his like that. Some people are just really they thrive in that space. I don't know if that was an area where he thrived, but.
Yeah.
But he did it, and he did a lot of it over the years. He was trying to promote his music. I get it. He was trying to get the word out.
On that tour, Chuck was rejoined by Eric Greif as a manager once again. How would you describe the dynamic two of them shared?
Volatile. Best friends, enemies. Best friends, enemies. It was a very complex dynamic, for sure.
Yeah. Obviously, something changed when the band went overseas. What changes did you notice?
In what? Like
for the Human Tour? Like once you finish US, you were doing Europe, and then like some things started to happen there. So what would you say changed?
It was so many things, so many little things that just turned. I think there's a documentary on it out there, but it's just things happened. Personal things for Chuck, business things. Him and Eric had a falling out. There's dynamics between band members, other bands on the tour, tensions, audiences. There's a lot going on.
Also, on that tour, you were joined by Scott Carina on bass. What was Scott to work with?
Scott's cool. He was awesome. Yeah.
So the European tour, eventually it comes to a halt because there's some equipment problems. What really happened?
What do you mean? Like why?
Like, I guess the equipment was confiscated by one of the promoters and the band couldn't play.
No. Well, it got confiscated once it was over.
Okay.
That's why Cynic couldn't go make a record, because our gear was held. And then then the hurricane hit. And then that pushed all of Cynic's schedule back. But the gear was confiscated after the tour that's why it got confiscated, because there was an angry promoter saying, you haven't played my shows, so I'm holding your gear, because it was like the bus it was a whole thing where basically it was being held for ransom, because. And
that's a lot to be frustrated about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the least of Chuck's worries. There were so many other things going on at that time.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Do you think Chuck was mentally equipped to handle a long tour like that? You kind of touched upon it a little bit, but...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who's mentally equipped to handle a long tour.
That's right.
You just make it work, and you have to be patient with yourself and realize some days are easier than others, and it's just like full throttle, full catastrophe living. When you're on tour, you just have to be prepared for everything to go wrong, and just know how to dance. I mean, it's great training. I always say, like, the road is great training for life, because you have to navigate a lot of hiccups. You're pushed out of your cocoon constantly. You don't feel safe, which is good practice.
When did you leave the band? How did your time with Death end?
It was really after that tour. I mean, everything just kind of fizzled. And I think Chuck was in this very raw place where everything was being excavated again.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of a slow fizzle.
You never work with Chuck again. How come?
Because I focused on Cynic, and Chuck went on to work with other musicians, and we just all went our separate ways,
With all this experience in mind, what was your personal opinion of Chuck?
Again, it's so layered, but I try and reflect on Chuck as a friend, somebody who I think of the parts of him that had light and were. I mean, he was just a complex person like the rest of us,
Yeah.
I mean, I reflect on somebody who wrote some cool music and got to have some cool experiences together,
Years later, you were involved in Death to All tribute. What was it like to revisit that music again?
Death to All was
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, it was. I had a good time the first few shows, especially. It was fun to do the human stuff, you know. And, yeah, I mean it's it's a cover band essentially, right? Without Chuck, so. But yeah, I mean there was a sense of nostalgia, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, were you surprised how many new fans came out to see those shows?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Again, I've seen like the first tour, walked around the audience. I've seen every single Death show in Chicago. Barely knew anybody in that crowd.
Yeah.
And they were singing the lyrics, everything.
I know. Yeah, it's incredible.
I mean, there were some very touching moments. I remember one time you took like a little bit of an intermission and you showed the movie, and the movie stopped and you got all these young kids chanting, "Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Chuck." I'm thinking, what a special moment it must have been.
That's really sweet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, music saves lives, right?
it does. When you look back at your involvement with Chuck, Death, and Death music, what's your biggest takeaway?